The world stood still in West Berlin. The parliament had become a museum. It was the time of the Cold War. Barbed wire and East German soldiers had blocked the bridge. What's going on here? Can't you see it? We're closing the bridge. Paul Herbert didn't ask why. In the East, it meant you question the authorities. Why was a dangerous word. It was a sign of subordination. Can I go through? Where do you want to go? I want to go home. I live in Treptow. Yes, you may, but once you're past this checkpoint, you cannot return. West Berlin will be cut off from tonight on. No more trespassing. Now Paula knew what was going on, and there he was. I live in the East and work in the West. What shall I do now? Paul Herbert's life was never the same again after that night in August 1961. Half the city disappeared overnight for everybody, East and West. The wall became the last step in completing the Iron Curtain dividing Europe. It took several years before separated family members could meet again. Eventually, Willy Brandt, the mayor of West Berlin, negotiated the first family reunions. I met my grandmother for the first time. She was already well in her 90s. Born during the Kaiserreich of Wilhelm I, from Imperial Germany to the Weimar Republic and Nazi Germany, my grandmother had finally become an East German citizen. The whole world had been turned upside down in her lifetime, but her village stood still. It looked like 100 years ago. I was about 8 years old when I took my first plane journey. We landed in Wiesbaden, visiting some relatives. I sat in my uncle's car, peeping through the window. Suddenly, all the houses were gone. We were in the outskirts. There was no wall. Why? I couldn't believe it. A city without a wall? How is this possible? I felt a bit frightened. What happened to the wall around Wiesbaden? Did it just disappear? And the adults didn't say a word about it, showed no reaction whatsoever. Have they kept a secret from me? I couldn't imagine a city without a wall around it. Divided by the wall, the two halves of the city moved in different directions, and the dress code in the West changed from one year to the next. For example, if you look at old TV footage from the 60s, you will notice one thing in particular. The students wore suits and ties at the demonstrations in '65. But only 1 year later, they all wore blue jeans and long hair became fashionable. This was the hippie generation, a change in society. But the East remained conservative. Culturally, the two parts of the city diverged. Eventually, the youth in the East would pick up on Western fashion, but there was a time delay. From now on, you could always tell who was from the West and who was from the East. 3 Linden. You always had to wait for hours. A 2-hour drive meant 10 hours with the border checks. There was one clear rule. Contradict the border guards at your own peril. They examined you with hostile looks, had rude manners and attitudes of superiority. But Werner Knüppelholz, who was an old friend of my parents, lost the cool one day after hours in the car queue. "We don't recognize the Soviet-occupied zone," he declared. He should never have said this. Well, they asked him to get out of his car, and then they started to dismantle it, piece by piece, screw by screw. They transformed his beautiful sports car into a heap of spare parts in no time. They even pulled the engine apart. And then they told him to get lost. Werner Knüppelholz, he was always so fond of his sports cars, particularly this cherry red Alfa Romeo with an open roof. What a car it was. Why couldn't he have kept his mouth shut?